Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Communication 24/7 Podcast, where we communicate about how we communicate. And I'm your host, Jennifer Furlong. So today we're having another live stream. So that means it must be an unscripted edition of the podcast. It's really exciting for me because today I'm not joined by one special guest, but I have several special guests. So some of you know that my side hustle is as a media analyst for Adfontes Media, the creator of the media bias chart. And I'm going to just show an example of that really quick here. So everybody who is interested in the news has an opinion about the news, and they definitely have opinions about where we place their favorite news sources on the chart. So you either love it or you hate it, right? And so what I would like to do is I'm going to step back for a moment and allow my fellow analysts to introduce themselves. And really at this point, let's just kind of get your names. Rodell, I'm glad to see you have joined us. Hi, Rodell. Yes. And we do have our political leanings to the right of our name. That's just to help the audience understand, that we do have a well-rounded group here, and we have lots of political leanings represented here. So yeah, let's get started with some self-intros. Why don't we start with Roshan? I guess he doesn't want us to see his face. But he's going to be a part of the podcast. Now, those of you who are watching live, we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube as well as Twitter. So if you are able to make some comments, if you have questions for us throughout the show, please feel free to put your comments in there, and we'll make you a participant in the show. So yeah. So how about with Roshan? Why don't you just real quickly introduce who you are, where are you calling from, and how long have you been a media analyst with Adfontes Media?
Okay. As Jenna said, my name is Roshan. I am calling in from Cleveland, Ohio. It's where I was born and raised and spent most of my life. And I believe I've been an analyst since the summer of 2019.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of the same for me. I think it was that summertime training that maybe we were a part of that together. I can't
I
remember.
think we were.
Anyway, yeah. Okay, so welcome. Next, Rodell, how about you just real quickly introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Rodell Fields. I have been affiliated with Adfontes since the fall of 2020. I live in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, Springfield, Virginia. And I think you've already identified me, which I didn't do as a left lean.
Right. The power. I'm able to go in there and just kind of mix things. Yes. StreamYard. All right, Erin, how about you?
Hello, my name is Erin Fox Ramirez. I'm calling in from Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm a left lean and also a PhD student in media psychology. I have been with Adfontes since October 2020.
Excellent. All right, Dan, you're muted.
That's in case I clear my throat at the wrong time.
Don't worry about that.
I'm Dan Matson. I'm calling in from Brandon, Mississippi, which is not my home. We're my wife and I are on a month-long road trip, and so we're visiting in beautiful Mississippi, where the plants grow tall. I started at the beginning, first round, February of 2019 when I had the first training.
Okay, yeah. So we've all been here for at least a couple of years now. For myself, I started. I do believe it was with Roshan that summer of 2019 when I went through the training. I'm calling in from Savannah, Georgia, and my experience with Adfontes, though, as an analyst started in 2019, but I remember I saw Vanessa had put out the media bias chart online somewhere. And I remember I was teaching a class and I was online just looking for materials to talk about media literacy and just giving me a way to, talk with the students about this very idea of bias and research. And I stumbled upon her media bias chart and I got so excited. I sent her an email and I was like, I want to be a part of this. So that's kind of how it started for me. So with that, all the rest of you, I'm interested in hearing, how did you first find out about the media bias chart? Where did you see it?
Well, I saw the chart. I was aware of it, but somehow I stumbled across an essay that Vanessa wrote on CNN.
Mm-hmm.
That's what drew me in, because she had insights. I've been a long time CNN watcher, well, for quite a while, and there was something that bothered me. I couldn't tell what it was that bothered me, but she identified it.
Mm.
So I said, this lady's got some deep thoughts here. So that when I got a chance to join with the first training, I put in my application.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So CNN appearance. Rodell, what about you?
Well, my exposure came about because one of my friends from law school, who was a Wall Street financier, had heard of Ad Fontes. He had the information and he sent me the link. And I had no previous awareness of the media bias chart before that time. Mm-hmm. Needless to say, I've caught up substantially over the past year and a half. And, my primary interest in this is about two or threefold. First of all, I am an avid consumer of news, to my detriment sometimes. And at this stage of my life, and for the sake of full disclosure, in a couple of months, I'll be 72. I know I'm just a pup, Dan, but hey. At this point, I'm striving to maintain as much cognitive ability as I possibly can. And this venture certainly provides an opportunity for that, because you're forced to deal with current affairs. And you're forced to be able to you're forced to engage other analysts because needless to say, using our rating parameters, if you're within a certain level of points, you're okay. If you're not, you got to talk about it. And that exchange is it keeps you sharp. I mean, it keeps you engaged.
Yeah, that's a great point you made, talking about, having to really exercise the brain to be able to, think about these issues and listen to the other analysts and really be able to just create, not even just I guess maybe an argument, and to explain how or why you view a certain news item a certain way, but yeah, I agree. I think it's a great exercise in our mental faculties, if anything.
Well, I've always had a modicum of self-awareness. We all are biased, and being involved with AFON has certainly made me identify my biases and learn how to, the extent one can, overcome them to be a relatively neutral observer and commenter.
That's right. That's right. Well, I've certainly enjoyed the times that we've worked together. We've had some really good conversations around some of these topics. So, and we're going to say more about that because I think you're right. Being placed in a situation where you're able to talk these things out with people who have different political leanings from yourself, it really does help bring about an awareness of your own bias. Aaron, what about you? When did you first learn about the media bias chart? What drew you to it?
I think I found it through school. My previous career, I was a contracting officer for the government. and it was a really great job, but my heart wasn't in it. And I went back to get my master's in media psychology, and I fell in love with how the media informs our world, social media. And I think I saw it on LinkedIn. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
And then you go down that rabbit hole of research, and then I looked at the chart, and found the website, and I just applied on a lark. I was like, this would be fun.
Yeah.
And here we are today. And I'm not just an analyst, but I also am involved in like developing the team behind the scenes. And it's been really fulfilling. Like I get so much back from it, and I enjoy being a part of this project.
Yeah, yeah. I think all of us, this is a great project to be a part of. And I think that's why it is such a great team. When everybody believes in the mission, it makes it easier, to do this job. Roshan, what about you? Where did you first see the media bias chart?
So I had actually not heard of the media bias chart until I actually applied for the
Oh,
position.
uh-huh.
I had actually come across hearing about it in a newsletter about the media.
Mhm.
It's a newsletter run by Steve Krakauer, and at the end of like some newsletter, I think it was in July of 2020, he said, "Hey, by the way, there's this thing called Adfontes Media," and he put up a sample of the media bias chart, and he said, if you think they're making a mistake here, you can become an analyst yourself. And
Hmm.
so I think at the time Vanessa had put out a call for analysts, so I thought, hey, why not? So I applied, thinking I think by the time I applied, I was actually past the deadline she had sent. So I
Yeah.
figured I would never hear back from her, but I did, and
Yeah.
that's
And the
how I got
rest is
started.
history. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I don't know about you all, but one question that I'm asked pretty frequently is, so how do you get a job like that? I mean, they're paying you to read the news and then you tell them what you think about it and they actually take your opinions and put it on the chart. Like, how do you get a gig like that? I can't believe they're paying you to tell them what you think about these articles. And so one of my responses is, usually you go down that long list of, well, I've been in the communication field for 30 years and blah 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 blah, and that's I do want to give a few minutes for everybody to address that, because I think it is important for anybody who's going to watch this later on, or if they're listening to this later on, to really understand that the training that goes into being an analyst on top of what we're already familiar with. I mean, all of us, we don't all come from the same backgrounds, but I think we all come from similar enough backgrounds where it's connected to research and writing and media literacy, something like that. I mean, for myself, I started out as a journalist and then I became an editor of a newspaper. This was all while I was serving in the Marine Corps. And then afterwards, my love for communication, I knew I wanted to stay in this field, so that's why I ended up going into communication and got my bachelor's and my master's in it. And now I'm in a PhD program for applied linguistics, because I just love studying language and seeing how language just impacts everything, that happens around it. So in my field, and I also taught communication research and public speaking, for a very long time at the college level. So I'm very much attached to research and writing and learning how to be a savvy consumer of communication, not only, an effective communicator on that side, but how do we become more savvy communicators when we're receiving the messages, reading and listening to whatever it is that we're listening to. So that's kind of my background with leading up to, how do you get that kind of a gig? So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is your actual background and connection? What are some of the skill sets and things that you have had to build on to do this job well?
Well, I was an educator in LA Unified School District for 31 years. So the first half of my career, I was mostly a seventh grade English teacher. And I got into computer technology rather early, when it was coming into the to the public schools, and it was almost an accident. I got a grant, and I didn't, and they're trying to figure out who they could give these Macintosh computers to, but they didn't. Nobody wanted them because nobody knew what they were. And I got 5 of them, the first model LCs, and I got to take one home, and well, for me, the graphical user interface was transformative in teaching writing. Okay, that's one. But more relevant to what your question is, that as I became a technology integrator, one of the key things I had to deal with was how you keep kids from going to the wrong place on the internet. Now, we had these filters, and the kids knew how to get around them. And so teaching students to evaluate media seemed to be like a no-brainer. I mean, it seemed to be something that society had to do. And so I thought a lot about how you teach people to evaluate what they're looking at. And I thought about that before I ran into this thing with Vanessa. And so that's probably the hook. It's because, see, I was watching CNN. What I hadn't figured out was how they had all the cable networks do this. They blend opinion into analysis to a degree which undermines the delivery of information. And I mean, if you know that you're being fed, sardonic opinion, well, you can kind of filter it out and think about the facts. Well, though, that's funny, but what are they really talking about? You think you can filter it out. The trouble is, it's actually quite difficult to, when you have no external no external point of reference. It's actually quite difficult to sort that out. So what we've developed is a methodology for doing that. I think it's really a very transformative. I think it has just our methodology has a lot of purpose, a lot of usefulness in general, not just for what we use it for.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that I want to have be a part of the conversation today, because I think that's something that a lot of listeners are wondering about. How do we go about making the decisions that we're making, when we're placing these certain sources, on the media bias chart itself. Aaron, you said a little bit about your background before, answering this question, what qualifies you to be an analyst? Can you expand on that a little bit? And what are some of those skills that you have found to be useful in being an analyst?
Sure. I'll say that the one thing I like best about this process and the training that we go through is that it's iterative. Like, it's something that's constantly evolving. Our opinions change, where things fall on the spectrum change. So we've seen several outlets move over the last few years, and things will continue to move. And it's not set in stone. And I think my opinions have changed from the conversations that I've had with all of you. And I've always gotten a lot from that. I come from a contrarian family where we like to argue, and there's a congeniality behind it. And I felt like over the last several years that had been lost, and it became, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're evil. And I just don't believe that,
Yeah.
And it is heartening to work with this group when there's so much polarization out there. And that's not what we're doing here. And that's what I believe everyone is. And we just need to spread that message.
Yeah, I agree. And that actually, Roshan, I'm going to get to you to talk about what are your qualifications to be an analyst and the skill sets. But before we do that, I just want to real quickly show that Karen is watching on LinkedIn, and she's wondering about the letters that are behind our names. So yeah, you got it right. Left, right, center. That's one of the things that we really I think is a benefit of working with Ad Fontes, is that you're working with others that have different political beliefs, from yourself. And a lot of times though, I'll find that as we read through some of these articles, it doesn't matter, if you're right lean or left lean or, at the center. Much of the time, I think we end up reading these articles pretty closely, and of course we get, a little far apart depending on the topic and depending on the source, sometimes. But I think most of the time, we're doing a really good job of being mindful of our own, political ideologies and how that might have an impact on how we're reading these articles. So good question, Karen. Thanks for asking that, noticing that. Roshan, what with your background, what are some of the things in your background, the skills that you've had to develop to that you think you're using that enables you to be an effective analyst?
So my background is that I'm an attorney. So I think I kind of use those analytical skills that you develop as an attorney,
Mhm.
quite a bit in order to rate articles.
Yeah, that's, when I go over this when we talk about persuasion, in some of my communication classes, especially in public speaking classes, and we talk about the differences and if there's a question of fact, right? And how do you determine whether something is true or untrue? And then there's, a question of value. So if you're arguing based on beliefs, right, or a value system, that's going to be a much different, type of argument versus if it's a call to action. So now I'm trying to persuade you to actually do something, as a result. So I think, yeah, the skills that you've had to develop as an attorney absolutely, serves you well in this type of a of a job that we have. Let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits. We've kind of gone into it a little bit, with working together and getting different viewpoints. Besides those different viewpoints, have what has being an analyst done for you as far as developing your own ability to read the news and be a more savvy consumer, of communication? How do you think that this has benefited you?
Well, I guess I'll dive in first.
Mhm.
As I said before, I have always been a vociferous consumer of various news products. And I always considered myself to be a relatively sophisticated consumer. But there's nothing like wider exposure to show you that you're not all that in a bag of chips, you know? Uh, as I indicated before, I'm a pretty introspective person. And for the most part, I've always been aware of my biases. However, all of us have blind spots, and
Mhm.
I have been introduced to my blind spots through this process. A lot of our reactions tend to be sort of reflexive or knee-jerk reactions when certain things come up,
Mm.
and your initial response will be, "Well, it's this or not that or whatever." And then you have someone who has different life experiences, a different perspective, different ideology, and they are able to point out a different way of thinking. Essentially, I'm a walking empath. Okay, I'm just an everything sponge. I identify with a lot of different people, a lot of
Mhm.
different people who could care less about me as a human being. I understand exactly where they're coming from, and you know what? I sort of feel sorry for them because the price of satisfying them is my humanity, and that's too high a
Mhm.
price to pay. So
Mhm.
we have to sort of work something else out when it comes to that. Uh, just in terms of bias, we all go in this with a certain preconceived notion of how things are, whatever. Uh, but again, you're confronted with folks who have different life experiences, and you have to find a way of reconciling that.
Mhm.
And I think that people of goodwill, people who have a certain amount of intellectual curiosity are able to do it. And to paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, he basically is something akin to an informed electorate is a prerequisite for a democratic republic. So to see how well we're doing with that one, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a challenge.
So anything that I can do in order to help people become better consumers of news, to help people identify when they're being manipulated and sort of pushed to a particular point of view. You know, I look at stuff, and a lot of the things I look at, I might agree with, but I know it's biased. I know it's slanted, and I can acknowledge that. When I am confronted with information from sources that I don't think very highly of, I am basically forced to allow discretion to be the better part of valor, and to give them more consideration, not less, but more consideration, to make sure that I'm not allowing my biases to adversely affect.
Yeah,
That's such a great point.
I want to jump on something Rodell said, which is he referred to goodwill. That one of the things that working in a team does is it develops a sense of goodwill. I mean, you're looking at this person, or in the case of Roshan, looking at his name, but you're working directly with these people, and you have to care about what they feel as well as what they think, and so it forces you to give them a little more space. It forces you to rethink. Some of us, especially some of us men, we like to, when we're listening to the other person, we're already making our counter argument without listening to them really well. Well, you can't do that in advantage. If you do, you get called on it. So,
when we read through these articles, and like Rodell was saying, there might be a certain topic, or there's a certain source. We already have this preconceived notion of what we think, right? This topic or this source, but we do have to, and to your point, Dan, we have to temper that. And it's okay to read through the article, and there's no way we're going to completely get to the point where we can read articles without any type of emotion whatsoever. But if we say, hey, I feel that this article is slanting this certain way, or if I feel that this article is kind of, it's misleading, that's not good enough,
Right.
And that's, to your point, is, okay, if you're feeling that this is misleading in some way, we need to be able to point exactly to that phrase or the word that's being used. Where in this article can you show me that there is actually an attempt to actively mislead, the reader? Where are you getting it from?
Vanessa goes back to that again and again. Show, prove, quote something, especially in a difficult article. Put it down. Show why you gave it this, more extreme rating. You've got to justify extreme ratings. Absolutely.
Oh,
Aaron. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Before I forget this point, which I forgot earlier.
Yeah.
About 90% of the articles that we look at, people are able to review them in a relatively calm, objective way, and basically there is really no severe pushback. The problem comes with those areas where people are ideologically or emotionally committed one way or another, and all of us have these triggers.
Oh yeah.
And I've worked well, Aaron, because we're both left, so I haven't worked with you. But all of the rest of you have worked with me, so you have a pretty good idea of who I am. And Dan, you put your finger on the whole thing earlier. There has to be an element of trust with analysts. You have to believe that the person that you're working with is coming from a place of goodwill, because otherwise it's not going to work. If you think that the person that you have, has an ulterior motive, or if they're so ideologically wedded to their point of view that they can't be persuaded, then it's extraordinarily problematic.
Yeah, it makes it difficult. And I think that's to Erin's point earlier when she was saying, I think most people do want to to be able to have conversations like this, right? To be open to these types of conversations. And I don't know, in some way, maybe we need to, maybe this will serve as an example of where to begin to be able to have those conversations. Erin, what do you think about that? What kind of advice would you give to listeners who are on that struggle bus? Because it's easy to get on that struggle bus when we read certain articles. It's like, you want me to try to mitigate my own bias about this? Like, how is that? How do I do that? So why don't you talk about, some of the things that we talk about, in terms of um not necessarily the methodology, but just your own value systems and how you believe that we're probably pretty much the same, most people, in that belief.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into the methodology, but I do want to point to it and say that the process that we go through by pointing to the text, by looking at the words, the
Mhm.
use of adjectives, by looking at it that way and not at this as the speaker, because
Mhm.
your initial reaction when you see someone who's an opposite belief system of you or political leaning
Mhm.
is to, put your wall up. And
Mhm.
what Rodell and Dan both touched on was that they said you need to listen to hear, not listen to
Mhm.
respond. And that's the
Mhm.
initial reaction, be like, I'm already creating a counter argument. But are you even listening to the argument that's being made to you?
Right.
So it's active listening, it's taking that pause to really consider what's been said or written and think about it in a good faith way. Like, what are the
Mhm.
pros and cons of it, and why do I disagree with that position?
Yeah, listening to understand. That's such an important thing. And Karen actually has a follow-up question. And Roshan, I think I would like for you to address this. She says, so no discussion on facts, just the slant of the article. How do you account for fake news? We do discussion of the facts is actually a huge part of our conversation. So Roshan, if you don't mind, can you take us through what are some of the things, because I know in your lawyer brain you are definitely in tune, right, to the facts as you can find them, in the article. So what are some of the things that you're doing as you're reading through the news to try to discern facts from fiction and facts from opinions, and we'll address the fake news thing here in just a second as well.
Well, I guess in terms of facts from fiction, if we sort of see something that to us seems, is that really right? We can go ahead and look it up while we're rating the article, and
Mhm.
that's something usually at least one of the analysts of the three will might point it out. Or as we're doing these rating sessions in Zoom, they'll put something in chat while they're rating. Hey, did
Mhm.
you see this? So I think fact from fiction, I think we do a pretty good job of differentiating. In terms of like say facts from opinion, um, I think on a more politically charged topic that may cause a little bit more friction based on the
Mhm.
topic. Where um, if you're reading sort of a left-leaning article, a right-leaning person may think that that's more opinion, but a left-leaning person may think, hey, that's more analysis.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
that's
That's
true.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there might be some tension there, but I think generally we can get to sort of an acceptable range where we're not too far apart from each other, and then we sort of just average our scores.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point that you brought up, that while we're in these sessions, and by the way, if anybody, isn't familiar with it, when we meet in a pod, and we always have a balance of a right lean, left lean, and a center lean. And we meet live on Zoom, and we have the articles that we're supposed to read during our shift, and we read them together. So not on the screen together, but we read the articles and then we rate them individually. And then we look at our scores together and then have that conversation around those. And Roshan's right. Sometimes, if you're reading something that could be questionable or you're not quite sure about the validity of the information in it, then we go on a hunt, and we basically do what we hope a lot of other people would be willing to do, is just take the time to look up, the information and see how it pans out as compared to, other sources that are also reporting on that same thing. But, and to that point though, and this will be something I'm sure that's going to come up at some point, just because other sources are reporting the same thing doesn't mean that it's not necessarily still debatable, right? We've had plenty of examples where, I mean, even as a team, we're having to go back and re-rate certain articles because we're finding out later on that things that were said to be not true, turning out to be true, so that's another challenge, I think. So what do y'all think about that aspect of our job? We do the best that we can to try to discern, what's factual and what's probably true, at the moment. But it can be really challenging, in the climate that it's in, because clearly there is, we've seen it, left-leaning media and then right-leaning media. And somewhere along the way, we've got to try to figure out somewhere in there where the truth lies.
Well, that's one of the coolest things about what we do, and just to give people that haven't seen how we do it a little, one of the fun parts, at least it is for me, there's a certain competitive aspect. How Roshan said, well, sometimes one analyst will go out like a bird dog looking at, trying to
look what I found.
Yeah, right. And so if one analyst catches something that the other two didn't see, then you got busted. And then if the other one can find something and the other two didn't even know enough to look for it, then the guy or the person who finds the extra facts gets a good chuckle. And so there's a certain level of competitiveness in the whole dialogue thing that Roshan refers to. He's absolutely right that when you're reading something you agree with, you tend to see it as analysis, and when you read something you don't agree with, you tend to see it as opinion, and that's because that analysis results in conclusions, or it can. And then what's the difference between a conclusion of analysis and an opinion? Well, they're not that far apart. So we're dealing with a mushy aspect of human rationality and language. And I just think, as a former English teacher, it is really fun to do that. It's challenging and it's fun.
And, the funny thing about that is, the one analyst that might have a different rating from the other two analysts, a lot of times it's not the right and the left that are far apart. I've been in sessions where, like Aaron and I are looking at this as right and left, and we see it exactly the same. And then the center is the one that's kind of, off out in the field somewhere, and maybe they saw something that we weren't able to see. And so if you are that person, but to that point, if you are the person that's kind of out there on your own, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not seeing something, that the other two are seeing. Maybe you are seeing something that the other two are not seeing, and vice versa. So
sometimes
it really does keep us on our toes.
Yeah, sometimes you're seeing something they didn't see. I'm speaking as one guy who's out off the separate. Sometimes I'm just wrong, and the thing is that my fellows will correct me, and I'm obligated to listen to them, consider the rubric that we're dealing with, and correct myself. It's a process.
That's a good transition to come up this next question. Chad is watching on YouTube, and he says, when distinguishing between opinion and fact in the ad Fontes system, are opinions judged on some qualitative or quantitative basis? So who would like to explain our methodology? Because Chad, we do have a methodology. So yeah, it's not just, hey, I feel like this. And we do have a system in place so that we can try to be as consistent as possible, when we are rating these articles. So who would like to address that question
Well,
regarding? Mhm,
I'll start off with this.
mhm,
When I am looking at opinions, particularly opinions that I find problematic or I don't agree with, what I do is I look at the opinion as it is reflected and I see how that opinion is supported. I
mhm.
mean, if it is supported by rational arguments, whether I agree with them or not, but if they're supported by rational arguments, they're going to be rated higher than somebody who just says, all Black people are ignorant and they're beyond redemption.
Mhm.
And that's it. And you don't see anything else. Well, obviously, that's an opinion, but it's not very well supported other than your own bias.
Right.
So the extent to which you can provide supportive information that one could reasonably conclude is fair, not balanced, but fair, and insert it in a fair, cohesive argument, then that opinion is going to have a higher rating than somebody who's just talking off the top of their heads.
Yeah. Yeah. You can have an informed opinion versus just kind of talking. I'm just blathering about, my biased opinions, and there's absolutely nothing that I can provide that's going to help support, if I'm making an argument. It's one thing to make an argument and you have evidence and you're trying to use sound judgment to support those arguments, versus just like with your example, Rodell. There's no way to really support that. Um, who
Full
would
dis-
like to talk about the? Go ahead, Dan.
I have to tell you that Chad's my brother-in-law. I clued him into our broadcast.
Yeah.
So I just want, Chad, I'll just say one thing in the early part of your question. It's really a two-part question. Facts from opinions. It's not so hard to tell facts from opinions. Um, then whether or not the facts are valid or not is another matter. But a fact is really a semantic way you judge a fact from an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, and I'll just make that point. There's some other points I could make, but Jen, you want to move the discussion along?
Okay. Well, actually, it is a good time because we do have another question on YouTube that came up from David. How has your experience in training as an analyst helped you to reduce the polarizations of views that you experience in your daily life? That's such a great question. Who would like to address that?
I could start with that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been very helpful to me. Like Rodell mentioned, he lives in the Washington, D.C. area. I am born and raised in that area. It is very liberal. And I do, as a left lean, you can see from my name, I do have liberal beliefs. But
Mm-hmm.
I think given being in that bubble and the people I was surrounded with, I was never really exposed to the solid argument based in fact and opinion and why they think their position is better than my position. And what has really allowed me to do is have, I think, better friendships with people who see things differently than me. We can engage on the quality of the argument and not just pundit talking points that you'll hear on headlines and see on the news. It just really made me have a lot more compassion and empathy for people who think differently than I do, because they're not bad people. They just have different value system that they base those beliefs on.
Right. And I think we've been able to develop an understanding, just by even looking at our chart. When you meet someone and they tell you, I mean, they're getting 100% of their news is from that one organization that we know is way to the right of the chart or way to the left of the chart. That gives us some insight as to, well, of course this is their argument or their belief, because they're not really tapping into a lot of the other sources that are out there to give a more, I guess, a better rounded, understanding of the topics that it is that we talk about.
Yeah, to that point, I found several sources from the rating that are right leans that I love to listen to, even more than some of my left lean podcasts. So
Yeah.
that's been also very helpful for me.
Yeah. What an interesting thing to happen, right? Oh, we can listen to each other's stuff. I mean, and for me it's the same. I think that's it really has broadened my understanding in when I have conversations now. I am definitely trying to be more in tune into listening to understand versus listening to just create my argument, and waiting for my turn to talk. It's a much different, type of communication that happens. Absolutely. Anybody else want to talk about how this has helped reduce your polarizations of views that you experience in your daily life?
Well, unfortunately, in our society, everything and everybody has been commoditized.
Mm,
And the problem is, in terms of media products, we've all been sectioned off in one part or another.
mhm.
I used to look at cable opinion uh, programming, I wouldn't say incessantly, but a lot. And I found the quality of my life declining. I felt, it's like you're depressed all the time. Like when you're hammered, like 12 hours a day from one program to another, and, you know, they all have uh, talking points or whatever. And let me put it this way, and I'm sort of being somewhat pejorative, but, I don't want Rachel Maddow telling me what to think anymore than I want Tucker Carlson telling me what to think, you
Right.
know?
Yes.
And so basically, what this is done for me is to uh, try to identify points that we have in common with each other and try to build on those and hopefully build a higher degree of trust. Because if we don't, as a society and a culture, we're doomed.
What you just said is so important, though. I don't want Rachel Maddow telling me what to think about something any more than I want Tucker Carlson telling me how to think about something. And I think that is probably, if there is one thing that anybody can take away from this conversation, is it's that, be willing to read across the line and be willing to have your ideas, have your understanding of what you think about a certain topic, be willing to be challenged, and listen to what you normally wouldn't listen to, or watch what you normally wouldn't watch or read. And then you can make a better informed decision about those topics. But yes, I don't want anybody telling me what to think about any type of topic as well. And I think that goes into another debate that is pretty hot right now, is the whole First Amendment with social media. And if we have certain news sources that we believe are too offensive, or they're not sharing the type of story that we want them to share, should they be allowed on this media platform? I mean, that's like a whole case of worms that we would need an entire another hour to address that question.
I suspect
That'll be
they
in
did.
part two.
They did. It'll be
Uh-huh.
more like a week than an hour.
That's right. we'll
Mm.
have to do an entire series just on that topic alone. But yeah, Roshan, what do you think about this question? The how it's helped you reduce the polarizations of views that you've experienced in your daily life?
So I think I'm going to be a bit of an outlier on this
Mm,
response. I live in the bluest part of a what is becoming sort of now become a red state, and I've
mm,
pretty much lived here my whole
okay.
life. And even in my
Mm,
own family, we're kind of split
mm,
ideologically.
mhm,
So I feel like what I do now with Adfontes is not all that different from what I would do with friends at the bar or family at the
mm,
dinner table. It's just we now sort of have the construct of the an article to evaluate to then sort of put our arguments upon.
right.
So I feel like and another thing is I am not on social media,
Mhm.
so I'm not really sure that I see these negative aspects of polarization that I think have I think really affected a lot of people. in a bad way. So I mean, I think that's the reason why I stay off social media. So
That's actually not a bad thing because I think you're right with social media. Some of these news stories just spread like wildfire, and by the time they are able to kind of take a step back and do the actual journalism thing and actually check, to make sure that what they're putting out there is accurate, it has already hit, everybody's wall. So it's like, once you've squirted toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put it back in. It's just, it's impossible to do that. So it's a really challenging thing. And one of my hopes for having talks like this and bringing in analysts from Ad Fontes is to be able to just be a model for others in our country, because we know the polarization is bad, and we know that there are not really any discussions. I mean, it's people talking at each other, those talking points, that we see from the talking heads, and for me personally, it's just really it's really disappointing, and I do worry about it. I find it worrisome to the point where I want to be able to figure out a way where we can have, some type of a national conversation where people just learn how to have a discussion again. I think in many ways we've forgotten how to have, a discussion. So this is incredibly helpful. We have about 8 minutes left of our hour. Is there anything that anybody would like to point out to the listeners regarding what you have experienced as an analyst, whether it's a personal challenge that you're continuing to try to address, or maybe there's just something you haven't had a chance to say yet that, being an analyst has really helped you, in some way, or maybe there's a lesson learned, that you would like to share.
Well, I'll share something about being a centrist.
Mhm.
I get extra time since I'm the only centrist, right? Um,
Dan, everybody agreed that you absolutely would be able to take up for not having another CenturyLink, so not a problem there.
So when you get drafted, or when you get accepted into being an analyst, there's a questionnaire that's the purpose of which is to determine what your lean is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in the early stages there, and I declared myself a center, left of center left, or left of center leaning liberal. And Roshan told me many times he thought I was an undercover liberal. I was flying a false flag. But I tell you what, being an identified centrist has done for me is it has challenged me to examine the ideology of the left and the right, and that's oversimplification, of course, because there's many lefts and numerous rights. But anyway, to look at more ideological positions and divine where there is actual value in those positions, and where and some of those positions that are like that they're dead ends. So ideologies have purpose. They give coherence to a set of ideas, and there's always a core in any ideology that has value. But then other things get added to the ideology that are worthless, or maybe even counterproductive. So as a centrist, I like to think I can see, like X-ray vision, to see the flaws in other people. But as our leader Vanessa reminded me, that centers are biased too, and that's the other thing I've learned, is that there's a certain bias in being in the middle. Your bias is the temptation to want to shoot people on both sides, and to prove that you're in the center. And and there's also, but the other thing, and I'll close with this. The other thing that I've found out by being a centrist is that I'm really a classic liberal, and that actually goes spans from the never Trump Republicans over to the center the centrists, like say Spanberger in the Democratic Party. That's a fairly that's not a single position. It's a span,
right.
but it has identifying features. The classic liberal does, and so being a center in Adfantis has really helped me clarify what I believe and what I don't believe, and made me more willing to call out people that I don't when I don't agree with them. So it's been really a great experience for me, and plus my writing is better. So
right, yeah. I mean, as a I'm a core conservative. That's what I would consider myself, and as a core conservative, I find myself I get really upset with a lot of the right leaning sources when I feel like, okay, come on, there is a way to create this argument without without using logical fallacies and without reaching into without trying to manipulate your readers. You can make a good argument without, you can persuade without trying to manipulate by using those types of logical fallacies. So in many ways, I think sometimes I'm even a little more stringent when I'm reading right-leaning articles, than I am on the other side, because I feel like I would like to see higher. I have higher expectations. I demand higher expectations from that, and when I see that not happening, I find it to be very, very upsetting.
That's a great point. Demanding higher there's higher expectations. So when I tell my friends, well, look, the headline is misleading. It doesn't go with the text, and they ask, "What are you, crazy or something?" It doesn't matter, and then I have to explain to them why it matters, and I feel all virtuous,
It does matter.
they think that I'm some
and now
kind
you're
of a
you're preaching, right?
Well, stated differently, it's really a sad day when you wake up and you find that your friends are just as jacked up as your enemies are. because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is human nature, okay?
Right.
So the issue orientation, your political identity is one thing, but at the bottom is human nature. And you know what? As a person who's left oriented, I understand complaints about the nanny state. I understand the thing about identity politics taken to an extreme. It's like, and there is a tendency to compartmentalize things to basically too small a unit, okay? And we make friends out of people who are otherwise allies because, we challenge them. Sometimes, people are not being venal. Sometimes people are not being malevolent. Sometimes they just don't know. And if you inform them and they still are someplace else, that's another problem. But to automatically assume bad faith is a big problem in our society right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was to Aaron's point as well earlier, having those negative assumptions. Let's be open for a dialogue, and open to listen and learn about each other. Okay, folks, we are going to have a part 2, because there are a ton of other things that I think we can talk about. And I think we probably should talk about, have it be a part of the conversation. Because what we do, number one, I think is super cool. And, I think it's important. And I think, for us to continue having these conversations as a way to model for others, the type of work that goes into being able to have these conversations, at the end of the day. It is a skill. I always, in communication, I'm always saying it's a skill, just like any other skill. You got to work at it to get good at it. But in order to work at it, we got to know the tools that we can use, right? In order to become more effective at that craft. So, I thank all of you for willing to come on to the show and share your experiences and your opinions about this. I think all of us agree that we believe in Ad Fontes. We believe in what the mission is and the values. We all hold the same values. And even though we come from different political leanings, at the end of the day, we all do share that value, and that we just want to make sure that, as we have dialogues, that, people can have those types of discussions. And at the end of the day, we might still disagree, and that's okay. We're not going to hate each other for it. Right. And start calling names and all of that. So any parting words from anybody before we end?
Well, just a quick thing, Dan. If there was only going to be one center analyst, you were the guy. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Dan, for agreeing to. Dan was like he was very gracious in being that last minute, addition. So that's a lot of pressure. Like, what, he didn't have a lot of time to think about this. So I appreciate you, Dan.
Hey, Jen. Dan thinks about this all the time. Okay.
I know we all. Dan is like, this is my life. And look, Sarah's watching on LinkedIn. She said, great conversation. Thanks, Sarah. And Tom Jackson, excellent discussion. Thank you. Thanks for watching, Tom. Okay, so this won't be our last conversation on this. Stay tuned. Much more to come. Wait for part 2. All right. And I guess what I'll do is I'll repackage this in the audio format so that it'll also be available in a couple of weeks on all of your favorite podcast platforms. So keep your eye open for that. All right. Thanks everybody for attending, and I'll chat at you soon.
Thank you,
Jen.
Thank you, Jen.